Just a quick note on the format. What we'll do is we'll first go through some questions for the panelists. We'll go about 40 minutes with that, and then we'll shift over to some questions from the audience. So we're really looking forward to hearing from you about some of the opportunities and challenges that you see in some of the work you're doing. So with that, I will start my questioning and just mention that we are all, I think, interested in really finding some innovative ways to better address mental health at work. And at the center that I work at, we collaborate with many people that are here actually today because we really feel very much like we're all in this together. And the more we can get the private sector really engaged in helping us to find ways to not only fight stigma, but also create more healthy cultures in our workplaces, but also improve access to care. And I think that point was made this morning. We can't end at the point of addressing stigma and educating the workforce about mental health. We really have to move to the next level, which is improving access to care and really seeing care right through to recovery and sustained recovery. So with that, I'll launch into our first question. And that is, I mean, obviously employees depend on all of us for more than income. Employers provide meaningful engagement, social connection, EAP connection, benefits for treatment, not just for employees, but also for their families. So I'd like to ask our panelists, and we can start here with Jim, what is our responsibility for ensuring that as employers, we consider the mental health and substance use treatment needs of the workforce?
Well, it's hugely important. Just to frame the situation, our union, like Lonnie's, provides wages and conditions that we negotiate with the employers. We provide pension plans, health and welfare plans, vacation funds, training programs. We train them up completely. But down in the room is Karen Greer, who for the last 20 years runs our member assistance program. And when we poll our members confidentially, in valid polling, Karen's program scores as most important above everything else. You know, it was started as a way to deal with mental health, depression, divorce, and things like that. And over the years, alcoholism, opioid addiction has all come more and more into play. And I see consistently in the years since I've been president, which is the last 10 years, she outscores all of us on all things. That's how important what we do for our members in this field registers, and that's the proof of the importance of it to me. Hope that answers the question.
Hi, thanks, Darcy, and I just wanted to thank the Canadian Forum for inviting me here to be a part of this conversation. So I head up our talent and inclusion initiatives at Lyft, and what that means is that my team and I are responsible for bringing in the best and the brightest to the organization and then ensuring that we have created an environment that's really set up for everybody's success. So I think as an employer, if I approach this from a talent lens, employers have huge responsibility to make sure that we're providing access to care, but also within our workforces, destigmatizing this conversation and making it a discussable topic. So if you think about the incidents, like with 1 in 5 people actually experiencing some sort of mental health event or challenge, this hits close to home for everybody and very personally. And so if we can't talk about it in the workplace, we can't solve for it. So I think about this as a differentiator for our organization, making sure that we are focused on this through the culture that we're creating, but also our policies, our benefits, and creating space for employees to tap into this care. So really important for employers to really grapple with these issues in partnership with the employee base and make sure that there's support in a really comprehensive and well-rounded way.
Thank you, Lonnie Stephenson at the IBEW. This is an extremely important topic, and I was excited to be the opportunity to come and speak and participate in this forum. In the construction industry as a whole, because of the nature of the industry of unemployment going up and down, you have spikes. In 2008, when there was virtually no construction going on, all the trades across the board had thousands and thousands of members unemployed. Those stresses then result. We've had several suicides during that time. Members had worked 30 years and lost their homes, lost everything because there was no opportunities. Also, of course, in construction, besides the up and down, right now we're in a shortage, so now it's a stress the other way. Now these guys are working, 50, 60 hours, in some cases more a week. We got a huge construction boom. So it's a roller coaster ride just for their everyday life, and so it's so important that we have EAP programs available at the local union level, and we also have put some programs together at the national level. For our members to be able to communicate and know that there is an avenue for them to go seek some help, because not only with the mental issues of the job market going up and down and their unemployment reaching lows and highs, it's also the strain of working construction. And by the way, most people don't know this, but in the construction industry, if you don't work, you don't get paid. So if someone is off, it's a physical job, and they're having a back problem, they got an arm problem, they're not able to work, or they're missing time, they have no income. And so consequently it forces members in the construction, people working in construction, sometimes go to work when they probably really shouldn't. They should be trying to get healed from whatever pains they're having, whether injuries they may have had on the job, but they're, just to survive for their families, they're pushed to go to work. So it really compounds with the mental issue of just the nature of the job, and also opioids and other things because of the strenuous issue as well.
Yeah, I'd like to just follow up, because the Fighting Stigma is the title for this session, and I'm really interested in this idea that stigma I believe stigma thrives in darkness, and that the more we can bring mental health into the light in terms of visibility within organizations, the more opportunity we have to really tackle it and bring information to educate employees and really to just sort of raise the bar in terms of visibility on mental health issues. So I'm just curious as to how you may be bringing mental health more into the light and really helping people, especially in industries. I think about bricklayers and construction workers, and there's a certain, in my vision, and I hope I'm not stereotyping, but there's a certain thinking of toughness, like, you can sort of handle anything. So in light of that, how do you really tackle stigma, bring out the visibility, and help people feel comfortable seeking help when they need it?
So Darcy, you're dead right about the construction industry. It's as tough as it gets. It's almost all male. It's a hard partying industry. I started here half a lifetime ago in Chicago, and I've followed it in other American cities and in Europe, and it's equally tough wherever you go. Hard work, hard partying, okay? And that's just as true today. I think, I've worked around people with mental health problems and substance abuse problems throughout my life, both in construction and outside of it, and one sees it in the family as well. I think those of us who are leaders, both nationally, locally, in our companies or in our unions, the first step is to approach folks who are having problems as human beings. They are human beings like ourselves, and we all have our strengths and our weaknesses. So if you're going to pull the curtain back on stigma, you have to treat human beings as equal, and you have to show empathy and compassion. And I think in a hard partying, hard working culture, that's a tough breakthrough that folks like Lonnie and myself are all working on. But I think we have to, if we're going to attract the next generation of workers into the industry. That's one of the tough problems my union has now, is attracting new people and holding on to them, because the culture we have today is not the culture my granddaughter or grandson might want to embrace as easily as I did. So there's huge opportunities here, but there's a lot of education that we have to do in the process.
So at Lyft, we have a very different workforce that's filled with a bunch of millennials. So they come into the organization expecting that employers have thought about this, that we have an environment where people actually can bring their full and their authentic selves to work, both in the happy times. We celebrate, the babies and the new houses and, the work and personal achievements, but we also have to be able to support our employees through those lower moments in times of grief. And so we make sure that we're thinking about the whole person. And I think part of what makes that work in our culture is that it really does start from the top. And so one of the things that we talk a lot about is how do our leaders set the tone for what's okay at work. And so I think about an example of our co-founder, John Zimmer, just last year. He did an article about going through his own battle with depression during some of the toughest times against our competitors. And that was just a wonderful example for employees that he is human, number one, and he deals with his own life circumstances just like all of us, but that it's okay to talk about it. So we encourage all of our leaders to share our personal stories. And my own example, prior to my time at Lyft, I had 5 years of fertility issues, multiple losses, IVF treatments, and what comes along with that is a ton of anxiety and grief and sadness and loss, and you're experiencing all of that day to day as you're showing up at work, and you're not leaving any of that at the front door. And one of the things that I was supported by was having a workplace that allowed me to experience all of that. And to share some of those concerns, those issues with other people that were going through the exact same thing. And while I didn't go through that during my time at Lyft, one of the first things that I did when I had a chance to share my story on a company stage was to talk about that, in part because I knew that I could bring that part of myself to my new workforce, but also because I wanted to maybe touch somebody else in the organization that was going through something very similar, because we know how prevalent these issues are, but they exist in the shadows. And I think the more light that we can shine on those issues, the more that we make that okay. One of the other things that we really depend on at Lyft are our managers. So day to day, that frontline, leadership workforce is our first line of defense. They are the ones that are working with people at the front line, and we're training them how to issue spot, not necessarily show up as a medical professional, but how do you identify an employee that might be going through something, and how do you make sure that you can open the conversation in a way that is going to lend itself to that employee sharing what might be going on personally, and then how do you direct them to the right sets of resources. So we've teamed up with one of our providers, Lyra Health, to help us provide those guidelines for managers and actually train them, because we know this isn't something that typically managers have been tasked with, and so we want to make sure that we have a workforce that is prepared, because that's certainly the most that you can do from time to time.
The stigma, of course, in the construction industry, is a stigma already across anybody, in personal lives of talking about either substance abuse, mental illness, or just things that it's hard for anyone to talk about. In the IBEW, we have 11 vice president districts. There's 10 here in the United States and 1 in Canada. We started in the fall of 2017 in Canada, and started talking. We have an annual conference in each one of those districts. And we had a breakout session and started talking. Now, these are the local union leadership and officers that were there. And started talking about the issues of mental illness and substance abuse across all of our industries. In the IBEW, we have about 55% of our members are in construction. The other 45% are non-construction occupancies. We have members that work in utility, broadcast, manufacturing, telecommunications, railroad. So it's not just the construction end, so we're seeing it across the board. But we started at each one of those conferences, asked the question similar that the First Lady McRae asked today when, we asked, how many of you have had surgery, and everybody raises their hand, and, there's, yeah, I've had surgery, or sometimes it's a badge of honor, so yeah, I had surgery on this, or, my shoulder or something. But when they ask the question, how many of you either personally or have a family member or a close friend that have either committed suicide, had mental health issues, or addicted, to substance abuse, opioids, or other addictions. And at first, it was quiet. And then we started opening up and talking about it. We got somebody to give their personal experience. And once the first person gave their personal experience, then it was okay to speak about it. So before you knew it, the mics were lined up. Everybody talking about someone they either work, a coworker, or a family member, or otherwise that have been affected. So that whole stigmatism, especially in construction, we're rough and tough guys, you know, and it's even tougher for them to really admit or ask for help. So we've started a process, and we took that program through all of our progress meetings all last year. Now I'm in the process of putting together a video because we've got to get it out to our members. We represent about 775,000 active and retired members. So we got it to their leadership, the local union leadership, but now we've got to get it out to our members who are out there working each and every day across all the branches. So I'm working on a video that I'm going to be putting together. We're going to make it aware, and we're going to get it out to all of our members, talking about these issues, and that, you know, that they need to feel comfortable if they see something with their coworker. As we always tell them, I am my brother's keeper, I am my sister's keeper. If you see somebody that their changes in their life, they're not showing up to work, or they're coming in late, or leaving early, you see there's a pattern or something that, and try to talk about it, that we're trying to educate our members on how to bring those discussions in a tactful way to find out. Maybe they're going through, you know, a divorce or something in their family. Maybe they're having, you know, problem with their children. You know, who knows? There's so many different things, but try to at least open up conversation and get people to know that there's avenues that we could send them to get support. So it's huge, I think, this whole stigma, and let people understand that it is okay to speak about it. And the more people that do, the more of us are going to look around and say, wow, yeah, you know, it is. I mean, I've got my oldest daughter is bipolar, and, you know, and she's gone through some real issues. And one of the things we haven't talked about yet today, I think needs to be discussed for just a minute, is the shortage of mental health professionals. My daughter lives over in the Quad Cities, where I'm originally from, Rock Island, Illinois, straight west of here on 80 on the Iowa-Illinois River. The psychiatrist she'd been working with for her medications had retired. And she now has not, and that's been probably 8 months ago, has not been able to find another psychiatrist because everybody's so overworked, they're full, they're not even taking new patients. So that is a huge issue in this country, is not having mental health professionals out there to help these folks. And I'm very concerned about her, and you know, and someone to be able to get the, knowing bipolar, you can get the right meds, you know, they can live you know, a long, productive life, but it's getting that right medication, and she struggles with that a lot.
Yeah, I think those are fantastic points. And one theme certainly is around leadership, because leadership really sets the culture in an organization. And as I was sitting here listening, I was thinking about at the top of the Washington Post on every issue is democracy dies in darkness. And I was just thinking about the analogy with mental health and bringing it to the light, and how much it helps people really feel like if this is being discussed at the highest levels, culturally it's okay to do so. So I think that is really tremendous. And this issue of access to care is very, very challenging. Sometimes when we talk with employers, we ask, what's your biggest challenge? And they say, getting our people the care they need when they need it. We have 3 to 6 month waiting times typically for people that really need help, and it's really extremely problematic. So I think employers can be very influential in that process, and I'm kind of interested in your thoughts on how that might work. Because as we address stigma and culture, eventually we will get to access if we're doing it right. And access is key. I mean, one thing I think employers should be thinking about doing is have your HR benefits team themselves try to navigate the mental health system. That's a real lesson in the major challenges that exist. But I'm really interested in kind of thoughts around that progression of, you know, raising awareness, educating the workforce, creating the culture, and then that leap to access. How do we negotiate that as employers?
So I never hear something framed like that, but I think of Yogi Berra, you know, and the difference between theory and practice. And he said they're the same except in practice. So my own story is there was plenty of mental health problems and suicides where I grew up in the depressed west of Ireland in the 50s and 60s. When I became a trustee on a Bricklayers trust fund 30 years ago, it was jointly trusted by labor and management, as all of them are. I'm sure that it's the same for the electrical industry. And I read the plan, and there was practically nothing for mental health. And I was young, and I said, so what's with this here? You know, lots of people have these problems. Oh, it'll cost more money. It'll be this. It'll be that. And the guy that I was talking to had serious PTSD problems from the war himself. But he was thinking about the costs and how you sell that. But as it would happen, one of the employer's sons had a serious need of mental health care and going away and taking care of it. So I worked on him, and we managed to get it into the plan. And it's in most of the plans right now. When we talk about the opioid epidemic, I've had problems in my own family with one of my children. Our leading contractor has the same sort of problem. So when we talk about the union or the workplace or the industry, it's really a family of people. And I may have philosophical differences and political differences with our employers, but when we sit down at the end of the day as human beings, we have so much more in common than we have differences. And it makes it easy once we open up a little bit with each other to make some real progress on these issues, because you can't do business with a bunch of strangers, you know. You can do business with people who open up to you a little bit. So I think we're getting to the core of what our panel discussion is about here when we recognize that. Another thing I want to say about Stigma, in case I forget or don't get the chance, as somebody who was a worker, it wasn't so much the embarrassment that bothered me. If you're a bricklayer and you do bad work, you're going to get embarrassed because they're going to say, hey, look what you did, and you have to make it better. But if you have problems in the workplace from alcohol or working substance abuse, one of the barriers to coming forward and getting treatment is, will this follow me forever? You can get over the embarrassment all right, but is the fact that I went, had treatment, is that going to follow me around? And if I go from Chicago to San Francisco, for example, is that going to be on my record? That's a huge concern for working people. They don't have any money to dispose of, or disposable income to begin with, and they want to be assured that they're not undercutting their own lifestyles by going forward. And I think that's one of the core issues with stigma, and I'm glad, looking at some of the panel discussions later in the day, that people are broaching on this topic. I haven't heard a whole lot about it myself, but I think it's central to the practical part of the stigma thing, and I'll leave some room for other folks to talk.
Yeah, so access is really the critical piece. I think one of the things that we see is that when employees are going through some of these issues, sometimes they're talking about them in ways where they aren't directly or in very specific words asking for what they need, and that's why trained managers, trained benefits teams, HR business partners are important resources. We have to be able to understand what's being requested. So does a person need an FMLA leave? Do they need a reasonable accommodation? And can we go through that interactive process to really support that employee? Oftentimes, employees won't tap into the resources that are there, so how can you make it easier and accessible? So one of the things that we provide for our customer support teams in Nashville, which are at the front line, and they're dealing with these really critical issues amongst our drivers and passengers. And we want to make sure that first and foremost we're caring for that workforce. So we proactively bring medical support staff on site a couple times a week. So just knowing that it's there, I think, opens that door of access, and it also sends a signal that we want people to take advantage of these resources that we're providing them around their well-being and their mental health. So how do we send that signal really consistently, I think, is a conversation that we're having so that it doesn't feel it doesn't feel hard to tap into it. It actually is ever present and readily available. One of the other things I think is really critically important is that resources can come from a variety of directions. So we have professionally trained people at Lyft to make sure that employees are getting what they need. But the power of the entire workforce and the network that exists amongst our coworkers is really critical as well. And so one of the things that many of our employees take advantage of in terms of safe spaces and support are our employee resource groups. We recently launched a new employee resource group, which is called Uplift Together, and they're focused entirely around empowering people around their physical, mental well-being, and also differently abled people. And so this group is, one, making it okay to talk about these issues in the workplace, and then also partnering really closely with our people teams because they have such a strong pulse around what's going on with the employee population, around what sorts of other benefits would be, would be valued. And so we work very closely with those employee groups to create a two-way exchange around what's there, what's not there, how do we improve our offerings, how do we market those better and differently so that people are tapping into them. One example I think that illustrates this really well, when we launched our benefits with Lyra Health, which is 100% complimentary to our employees plus their spouses and families. We wanted to make it frictionless for people to tap into that. The piece of feedback that we got from many of our employees from underrepresented groups like our LGBTQ community and some of our racial minorities was that they weren't actually finding providers on the platform that they felt met their needs specifically. And so we worked in very close partnership with Lyra to expand that offering and to bring other folks onto the platform. It was a wonderful example in my mind of us listening to our employees and being able to respond to that. And then also a great example of working with a provider that provided excellent service and was interactive with us and trying to figure out how do we create something that's creating maximum value for our entire workforce. So again, it's not just about having these resources available. How do you allow people to really tap into them in the best possible ways?
Yeah, I think, as access and with our employers, obviously being a labor organization, we bargain, we sit down at the bargaining table and bargain with all of our employers. So we've been able to address these issues, several years ago of having access to employee assistance plans, where we can get people to get access, to get help, whether it's mental health or whether it's some type of an addiction. And so, we're always working with our employers, and all of our employers across the board, by the way. It's all about cost. Everybody's concerned about their cost as an employer, and we understand that. And they understand, and they also understand that they need to have a reliable workforce that's going to be there every day with a state of mind that's going to be able to work safely and not have their mind on somewhere else, and have an accident that could injure them or another coworker or cause, something to happen on the job, a disaster. And so we really do work well with all of our employers, but we've got the access of having bargaining to be able to sit down and talk about these issues and what we think needs to be covered, and because of that, I think we've got an excellent program. I do want to give one quick plug, if I could, for the North American Building Trades. That's our parent. We all belong to the building trades unions, Jim, myself, and all the other crafts. They have put together, Sean McGarvey, our president, has put together a task force, and just to talk about opioids in construction. And, because it really is an issue. Construction is the highest occupation, that has, opioid use. For example, in Ohio, there's a study done that if someone died of an overdose opioids in the state of Ohio, the construction rate was 7 times higher than any other occupation in the state of Ohio. So we know that, that we have got some issues, like I said, because these guys don't work, they don't get paid. So they're always looking for a way that they can, their back's hurting, they got their shoulders hurting, their knees, and 30 years in the trade, they're going up and down, all this physical labor, it gets harder and harder. They're trying to find a way to continue to work. We also have put together in the IBEW, we have our family medical care plan. We put together a national health care plan now. And we monitor that, all the international reps, myself, our office in DC, and all of our vice president districts, and many of our locals are now coming into that plan, not just construction. We're seeing some of our other companies come in too because it's a lower cost for them. But since it's our plan, it's designed like our pharmaceutical provider that covers our plan. They are tasked and they monitor everybody when they're filling a prescription. If it's any kind of a pain medication, they're tracking the history of that individual. If they're seeing that there's, seems to be a continued demand, they know whether they had recently had surgery or stuff, and they're starting to, to question whether a prescription needs to be filled or not, and we're trying to encourage more physical therapy type, ways of getting through the initial pain and surgery and stuff, use physical therapy rather than the pain meds. And so we're very active in that. We're seeing more of our employers join in that national plan as well.
Great comments. And the employee resource group, I think, is a really fantastic idea as a way to get people to come together and really share. And it just sounds like there's such great progress. And what's interesting is it does seem as though there are differences in age groups in terms of their willingness to come forward and really share what they're experiencing when it comes to mental health conditions. And actually, the American Psychiatric Association in May released a national poll they did that showed millennial work, it was on workplace mental health. Millennials ages 18 to 28 are much more willing to talk openly about mental health in the workplace, and they have an expectation that the workplace will be ready for them to be talking openly about it. And they actually broke down by age group, and as you got older in the age group, the numbers went considerably down in terms of willingness to openly discuss mental health. And I think we're kind of hearing a little bit of that in terms of Lyft versus, some of the experiences with the unions and the construction and bricklayers. So I'm wondering, how do employers that may have workers of all ages negotiate that willingness to talk openly about mental health, and how do we help those workers that have been in the workforce longer be more comfortable to open up to ultimately get access to care?
So we really push our member assistance program at all our meetings, in all our media, on our websites, and we have the two professionals go to local unions and make presentations, and that raises a lot of questions and a lot of work for them. Listening to what Lonnie said, I was in a city a couple of 100 miles south of here. It was a room this size. At some point, juncture in the conversation, I asked for a show of hands. This was masonry families of folks who had lost somebody to the opioid epidemic. About half the people in the room raised their hands. That's how bad it is in our industry. So there's open acknowledgement of a huge problem. We do have staff that works with it, and a lot of what our member assistance program does is connect folks in cities across the country to where they can find help, and works with the families to get through the programs. There's another upshoot from this as well, and it might sneak into the conversation here. It's the whole sexual harassment thing, which is kind of new to us in that 3% of masonry workers are women. But the women we have says, it's great you got us in, but you got to train your representatives to look out for us. And we're doing a lot of education on that at the moment at every level in the organization for all kinds of good reasons and protective reasons as well. And it seems to enmesh itself with mental health and substance abuse stuff as well. So I would say an old word that I used to be familiar with when I was younger was humanistic. We're taking a much more humanistic approach to preparing our people, our employers, and our union for the future, and making it much more attractive to the people. But it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of commitment at every level. And the more we do, it seems the more we have to do.
Yeah, it's really interesting to talk about how age plays a part in this conversation. I think this is a incredible place for the young people in the workforce to actually lead, and it sort of underscores the need for diversity in all of our workplaces, generational diversity included. I think one of the things that's important is to be able to meet people where they are. So obviously our millennial workers are coming into the workforce with this expectation and with attitudes that these are topics that are okay. But we also know that there are people that have a different set of, maybe values around this or different life experiences where this isn't as easy as of a topic. So again, how do you meet employees where they are, and make sure that your offerings, support your employee base in a really comprehensive way. One of the things I think it's also really important for us to focus on as employers is not just the cure, but the prevention. And making sure that we're being proactive in supporting people before they fall into some of these life circumstances that become harder to treat or harder to address. So, some of the things that we're doing proactively is, through wellness weeks, we're focusing on mental and physical health. How do you avoid burnout in the workplace, balance your lives, thoughtfully? How do we create space and send the message that, we're obviously working all in a busy startup, and our bottom lines are important. But if we have a burned out and sort of disengaged workforce, that productivity hit actually very much impacts our bottom line. So we make sure that we are sending the right signals about how people can balance and what resources there are to support that. One of the areas that we've tackled, I think, with some success is around financial well-being. So if you think about some of life's biggest stressors, it can be about buying that house or sending your kid to school or preparing for retirement. And so how do we proactively support our employee base with resources and tools and preparation for sort of these big life events? That's been something that we've heard back from our employees that they appreciate, they value, and it's supporting them in really holistic and comprehensive ways. The other thing that we do is, we're making sure that, again, managers are having these conversations day to day with employees, and the people team and the HR teams can't be in all places at once, but ensuring that as managers are coming into the workforce, they really understand our values, the resources that are there, thinking about all employee groups. So one area that I think that Lyft has been particularly progressive around is supporting our LGBTQ populations. And something that seems really simple to you and I, like, where do I use the bathroom at work? Gets much more complicated for this part of our workforce. So we, over the last couple of years, have been very focused on making sure that we have a really supportive environment. We launched our gender inclusion and affirmation policy to ensure that whatever ways that you identify, we're going to be there to support you. Use the bathroom of your choice. We've enhanced our transgender health benefits. So again, these are things we can anticipate as employers, issues that are going on within our employee base that are personal to people, and getting out in front of those things as prevention and preparation is equally important to access and to care in those really critical moments.
Yeah, I think the point you brought up of how to prevention, I think, is huge, especially I think about it from the construction point of view. And I think 40 years ago when I was an apprentice, and everything you turned to a screwdriver, it was always just wrist action and twisting a screwdriver. Today you go out on a job site and everybody's got these little battery drills, and zip, 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 and put them right in there, and so the tools have changed. I think when to cut a cable, electrical conductor, we had what we call the rabbit gun, just a big physical, arm, and you have to reach out and strain, and your eyeballs about pop out trying to cut some of that bigger cable. Today, they've got, through the tools and technologies now, we've got battery-operated cutters for a cable cutter. They can put it on there and push the button, and it takes care of that, and cuts that. So the tools have changed. The ergonomics, trying to make some ergonomic changes, as well, I think, is crucial to try to prevent, especially competitive-type injuries in the construction side. And so I think that's huge. And we also have launched, as we're seeing, we're working hard. We've got a diversity and inclusion committee that we put together 2 years ago now, and trying to let people know, women, people of color, LGBTQ committee, you name it, that there are opportunities in the construction trades, particularly in the IBEW, for folks to get into our industry. You know, for years and years and years, construction is pretty much a white-dominated industry, and still is. We're still in the transition period, but we're getting more and more, and especially, you know, with the women, now we're talking, you know, the different genders. So the whole thing of using the tools that are provided, you know, because they're not going to be able to lift as much as most men. However, I'll tell you, some of the women are pretty tough. And but you know, so we're trying to also be conscious of that. And one of the challenges we've got is we not only want to recruit these folks in our industry, we want them to stay in the industry. And women, especially those, you know, they're younger and they're childbearing age, if they have, you know, a couple children and they're taking time off work, like I said, you can't physically work too long into your pregnancy at the construction trades, and so, you know, they take off, and then it's not unusual for them to eventually go find a maintenance electrician job somewhere where it's not the same strenuous type of work we do in construction. So that's one of the challenges we have, particularly is keeping female members in the trade, because you know, they're always, and which is great. I'm glad that we're able to provide. They've got the skills to help them get, you know, move into a maintenance job somewhere. But at the same time, we're trying to get more diversity in what we look like, and so we're always struggling with doing that.
Great. Thank you all for tremendous input and answers, and responses are fantastic. So I think we'd like to now turn to the audience, see if people have questions for the panelists. There is a mic, a floor mic, so maybe make a short line behind that, I think, is the best way to do it. So I was asked to remind people that in an attempt to accommodate everyone's questions, please keep your question limited to one. And with that, take it away.
Hi, thank you all so much for an interesting discussion. My question's about burnout. The World Health Organization just added and expanded its definition of burnout. So I'm wondering what solutions do your organizations have to address burnout and its connections to mental health challenges?
Well, burnout in the construction side of our industry, I don't know that we experience so much burnout, because construction, you know, you're on this job this week, and then, you know, in another month you might be on another job. So and every day is a new adventure. You know, you're not doing the same task day in and day out in construction. The other industries that we represent, that I mentioned before, yes, someone in manufacturing, for example, they're running the same machine day in and day out. You know, there does tend to be more of a burnout in those industries, and even in that, most of our employers have tried to multi-train their employees for different tasks. So they're not just running the same machine day in and day out, that they've got an opportunity to move around and complete other tasks.
Yeah, I would say that, you know, Silicon Valley is a hard-charging environment, and as part of, you know, tech startups, people work a lot, right? So I think it's up to organizations, and we do this at Lyft, to send the signal that we want people to work hard. We also want them to play hard and make sure that they're living really balanced lives. And so there's ways that we can actually support that really visibly with employees. So things like wellness weeks, where we're reminding people it's important to be healthy, eat healthy, you know, get outside, get exercise, things that, you know, that seem basic, but oftentimes you have to give your employees a prompt to say, like, we actually encourage and support you to take advantage of these things. I also think that, again, through our managers, we're asking them to be able to spot people that might be going through some amount of burnout. Are they withdrawing? Do you see productivity going down? Can you tell that someone has something going on? And how do you open up that conversation to say, like, hey, we want you here for the duration. What can I do to support you? Do you need to take some time off? We obviously offer really generous vacation and leave of absence policies so that people can deal with their life circumstances as they arise. And then finally, again, using our employee networks, not only to remind people that mental health well-being is important, but to create an atmosphere inside the workforce where we're focused on the fun stuff too. We're doing social things. We have authors come in and it's not just about the grind of day-to-day work, but really sort of activating people in comprehensive ways, acknowledging that we are full people. We're bringing all of ourselves to work every day. It can't just be about the work day to day.
And my own perspective is a little different, having grown up over the other side of the Atlantic. Every construction site in Ireland closes for 2 weeks in August and 2 weeks around Christmas and New Year. I have a French brother-in-law. I think they have 6 weeks vacation. Now, if you're listening to me, you heard me say we have vacation pay. We do, but we're Americans and we don't take the vacations like we should, and I think it's a huge problem. I think we work too much and play too little in the positive sense of the word. I don't know what it's going to take to change that culture. It's nice to put on programs that regenerate people and that, but they actually have to take time off from work, and I'm probably one of the biggest offenders myself, in that I don't follow the tradition, but it's something that American corporations and American culture should look at more closely. I think the rest of the world does a little bit better on the burnout side because they live to do other things besides work.
Yeah, and the only thing I would say in addition is that stress and burnout can very easily lead to depression, and depression is the number one global rate of disability, and it's growing at a 10 to 20% rate every year. So depression is a major issue of concern, and employers are really looking at the cost studies now and seeing the need to help improve access to care and improve work conditions. So that's the upside. I don't think we've solved it. I think we have a long way to go, but we can all be part of the solution. So.
And perfect segue, because at Recovery International, we've just introduced a new program to decrease your stress and anxiety at work. It's a webinar series if anyone wants a flyer. But as you were talking, it occurred to me that I didn't hear anything about self-help and support peer-led groups as resources for people who are having difficulty getting in to see the professionals. And we often serve as an adjunct to professional help, and our brochures are in the psychiatrist's office, but if your daughter can't get to the psychiatrist's office, how is she going to hear about us? So maybe we're missing the boat by not making sure our brochures are in the HR offices, and you all might reach out to NAMI and Recovery International and other self-help groups to find out what resources are in your local communities, because we are a big part of the mental health picture, and I hope that we can do what we can to help the situation in the workplace as well as at home.
Yeah, I'll comment on that and just say that that's a fantastic idea. Like, one of the things that we are constantly striving to do is to put resources, accessible resources, in people's hands. So a couple of things that we've made available very recently is something as simple as like the Headspace app, like focusing people on things like meditation, and these are like evidence-based techniques that can bring down stress, that can focus people. And so, how do we talk about these things inside the workforce and make it easy for people to find them?
I have a question based on just definitions. Is there a way to measure and define burnout, and a way to measure well-being in the workplace?
That's a tough question.
I'm sure you mean like a research-based way to sort of define it.
American employers say that we have a lot of burnout, or we want to work on well-being. What are the metrics? How do you define it, those terms?
Yeah, there's a couple things. I wouldn't say that I have a perfect answer. This will probably sound very unsatisfying, but one of the ways that we are trying to keep a regular pulse on our workforce is through our employee surveys. And so we're asking a lot of things about our culture. How do people feel about their relationships with their managers? How do people feel about being perceived as a human and being treated well? How are people feeling? What are the indicators around retention and people's desire and willingness to stay in the organization? So these all give us a little bit of signal around what might be our hotspots or opportunity areas, and we pay a lot of attention to that feedback from the employees. I think we have some work to do in terms of really drilling into this area of well-being and burnout, asking the questions and making sure that we're looking at those trends over time to see if there are things that are changing for the workforce.
The other thing I would say is I know the American Psychiatric Association and the American Medical Association, because physicians have been very disproportionately impacted by burnout, they have put a lot of resources together. So I would, and I don't know if there's a universally accepted definition of what burnout is. And again, the WHO just put out a big announcement over the last few weeks. So I would say look at the AMA and the APA's websites, because I know they've done a lot of looking at the research, and there may be a universal definition on burnout. I'm not sure there is a universal definition on wellness. I think that is probably all over the map in terms of how it gets defined, industry by industry and so forth. So, but it's a great question, by the way.
Having heard the question and listening to one of the speakers this morning say that it's a $17 trillion economy, and 3% of it is involved with mental health, and knowing the endless parade of statisticians, data harvesters and analysts that I meet among my children's peers, I hope we're dedicating sufficient amount of time and energy and resources to maybe getting closer to the answer of your question. But I think we're just beginning that, frankly, based on the conversations I have with young people.
Yeah, it's a great question. My role at Lyft is really focused on our internal workforce and making sure that we've got the right resources for our employee base. Drivers are independent contractors. The way that I feel like me and my team can really affect this is ensuring that anyone that's interfacing with our drivers is really set up for success for that interaction. And that means giving them the tools to de-escalate situations. That means supporting them through some of these more challenging interactions that they're having at the front lines. It's a virtuous cycle. So if we have a really healthy workforce, we're better enabled to provide that support back to the drivers that we're supporting day to day. But it's a big challenge. People are working 24/7 lives.
I would say that if you're in the masonry industry and you're in a room downstairs with all that marble, but you look out and you see bricks, blocks, and all that, if you spend 8 hours a day laying that, you're probably not going to have a whole lot of energy for a second job. That's my experience. So you better hope we bargain good wages for you in this one, because when you give it all, there isn't much left at the end of the week, okay?
Yeah, and that is a good question, needs to be talked about a minute. Every day you pick up and you see we've got the highest unemployment numbers in years, but that doesn't tell the whole story. A lot of these jobs people are working, they're not a livable wage, let alone, a minimum wage. We're talking about a livable wage. And so you've got a lot of folks that are working, but they are working 2 or 3 jobs just to survive. And it's, at least they've got those opportunities, but the wages have not. If you go back in history, look back in the 50s, and I'm going to put a plug in for unions, the higher unionization rate, the wages more closely followed, the inflation followed the employer's, income. The average CEO today makes over 400 and sometimes our average employee. You go back in the 60s, it was like 40. So that's continued, that wage disparity is there, whether we want to talk about it or not. And it's really, and it's great that we've got a lot of jobs, but they're not all good living wage jobs, and that's really what we need for people to be able to provide for their families.
I had a question and a comment, but I think my question was kind of answered by the previous question regarding kind of challenges inherent in the gig economy with disintegrated workforces not being able to access services because they have no contact with an actual employer. I think that's a serious challenge, but I do have a comment for President Boland and President Stephenson. You member myself here with the state chancellor here in Chicago, too. And I want to say I'm really happy as a union member, as a member of the labor movement, to see leadership in the labor movement taking this seriously. I think the physical health and well-being of union members and the workforce at large has been something that we've emphasized traditionally, but I think the mental wellness of our members and of my co-workers is critically important. So I really just want to say I'm really glad to see both of you here. I'm glad to see President Trump here as well, representing those voices and representing the organized movement here. So thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to scratch the surface and I think of a topic that we haven't covered yet. As we unpack the issue of mental health in the workplace, we obviously live in a very bottom line driven society. How do we marry performance evaluations while also being inclusive of mental health issues that employees might be going through, and also helping them manage perceptions in the workplace? I work in advertising, and the culture is very much driven around perception, and perception is reality. And I think a big thing we talked about today is that with mental health, unfortunately, who you might see right now is not my reality. So how do we manage for that?
I want to just jump in quickly to say, I think that's a great point, and I think we have a lot of work to do on this one. Because when people come to me and say, do you think I should disclose my mental health condition to my employer? My usual response is, it depends. Because I think you have to be very careful. And if we're being honest, we've got a lot of work to do in this department. Let me just start with that, and I'll let the panelists take it from there.
Well, I think it harkens back to my comments about stigma and inhibitions about coming forward and why we're talking about cultural change. I've worked in England, Ireland, here, and it's much more competitive in this country. You're much more competitive with your fellow worker. So that in itself makes it difficult to deal adequately with the sort of problems we're describing here. But hopefully, you know, as we move along and get higher levels of interaction and interventions, we become a little more thoughtful in how we move the process forward. But this, you know, this whole conversation wouldn't have taken place 20 years ago. It's just our experience, and I really think, I agree with you, Darcy, we're at the beginnings here, and we're all optimistic that we can make for better outcomes for our members and for workers in general, but we just have to be confidently optimistic that we're doing the right things. I think it's very difficult.
Yeah, I would say that we're on a journey, and we're certainly not there yet. Prior to my time at Lyft, I spent 13 years at Google, and one of the things that we invested in, if I think tie this back to bottom line, we really wanted to understand what makes the most effective and the most productive teams. And what we found in our research was that fundamental to effective teams is psychological safety. So what that means is that you feel safe taking risk in the workplace and failing. You also feel safe being vulnerable and talking about your experiences. And I think unless we're able to really capture that, we're missing out on the most productive, the most effective, the most like sort of self-actualized organization. So we have a lot of work to do. I think at first it starts by kind of unlocking an understanding of what needs to change, and then educating your leaders and your managers and setting the expectation that that is your role as in playing that function in an organization. And a really big part of your responsibility is supporting employees, not just in the work that they're doing day to day, but as full people.
I also think the more we hear corporate leaders come forward and speak openly about their lived experience, that helps us chip away a little bit. But we have a ways to go, no question.
When you speak about discussion at the highest level of mental health, how do you educate your executive level staff who are resistant to participating in their own education?
Good question. Take it away.
Well, that is a wonderful question, and I can speak from my personal experience. You know, we talked about teamwork. You did a moment ago, and I think everything is about teamwork. Any effort in the workplace or in an institution is about teamwork. And as you try to move what I'll call the cliche thing, a progressive agenda forward, I think sometimes if people are very resistant from this and they're high-ranking in an organization and they're blocking change, you have to remove them from the team. You really do, to allow the rest of the people to progress. And that's been my own sad experience too, but some people just can't see the road forward, and you can't have them in position of power because they can hurt you as you try to change an institution. Sometimes it takes something as specific as that to solve the problems.
I think what I'd add to that is that what we're seeing it a lot with learning and development teams inside of more mature organizations is that they are really focused on this with leaders, not just sort of what you're shipping in terms of product or kind of the business nuts and bolts, but really like how effective are you as leaders? Last week we were sort of spent a whole day. We have about 60 VPs at Lyft in 3 cohorts. We're actually spending days together over the next six months talking about our own leadership journey and who we are as leaders and how we're getting the most that we can out of our employees. So it's a challenge, but I see organizations investing.
And we're almost at the end, so thank you so much for your question. One quick thing I wanted to mention is I think the cost studies and business case on certainly depression and other conditions is really forcing those leaders that are resistant to sit up and say, wait a minute, we need to do something. So the cost studies are really helpful when it comes to the business case. It can't be ignored any longer.
One
Last question.
Could not turn it down.
Oh, yes. Nice
Fred Stevie, as a National Union of Healthcare Workers. A quick question. In your experience, to what extent is the stigma that we experience in the workplace produced by our health plans and health insurance companies? And my question comes out of like a 25-year member of Kaiser Permanente. They do a wonderful job on medical health, but in terms of getting mental health historically, it's been treated like a stepchild that's relegated to the dark corner of the room. But it's like the member's experience when you try to get help. It's really difficult to get an appointment, and that seems itself, or even what the clinics look like and where they're located and how they're decorated. But is that your experience, in terms of the access? How does that affect you?
My briefing for this panel suggested that I say we need to do much more with the insurance companies. We've had baby steps, but there's a lot of room for providing a lot more access than we're providing now. It harkens to Lonnie's issue with his daughter. It's members across our organizations having more rather than less access. And we have to work on that. But, there's goodwill at work because you see the people who've showed up to address these issues here. But we need a lot more access than we have right now.
Yeah, and it's, when we go to bargaining now, and we're talking about healthcare issues, the discussions have changed. It's not just about, covering their, going in to have a surgery or something. Now we're talking more about the mental issues because, that's been called to the forefront. We're seeing it. The employers recognize as well that, if you've got people, like I said previously, if their mind's not on the job, especially, construction, really any kind of job, if their mind's not focused, it could cause injuries, cause problems. The employers are recognizing that. So we're getting better and better, I think, employee assistance type plans, and also what we're trying to do, like I said, doing a video and everything now, my goal is within the IBEW is to educate our members that we are your brother's keeper, you are your sister's keeper. If you see a change in behavioral pattern, coming to work, or just obvious their mind's not there, to try to do it in a you know, friend to friend, brother to brother, sister to sister, as we always refer to it. Try to talk to them and find out what's going on and make sure that you let them know that, hey, there are you know, places you can go to get help, and we've got them available, but people hesitate to do it. Again, it goes back to the stigma. The stigma of nobody really wanting to open up and say they've got issues. But like I said, when we started doing that series last year, went around to each one of our meetings, and we started asking that question about surgery first and then talked about mental issues or addictions. You know, once one person started, all of a sudden everybody had stories and they started feeling. So again, it's all about the stigma. I think we got to get over that. We got to get over that and make sure that, and our members and our employers have to respond as well. If someone does have some issues, it's not like in construction in the old days, you just lay that person off. You know, you're not being here, I'm just going to lay you off, I'm going to get the next guy on the out of work list. That didn't help that person address their issues. So now we're trying to do a better job of identifying problems and head them off and get people to get the right help that they need. But we do have a long ways to go.
Thank you. So please join me in thanking our esteemed panel. We're not going to do it again. I did have a couple things to remind you of. One is it's time for lunch in Gar Hall. And also there is Barbara's Bookstore will be set up at lunch in the Gar Hall. So some of the great speakers will be signing books. So if you're interested, please stop by. Enjoy, and thank you so much for your great questions, by the way. That was fantastic.